So, hello everyone. My name is Eric D'Souza, and it's my honor today to be interviewing Jack Batten, the current recipient of the Derrick Murdoch Award. The Derek Murdoch is a special achievement award for contributions in the crime genre. It is awarded at the discretion of the board chair of Crime Writers of Canada, known as the Chairman's Award for the first presented in 1984. It was later renamed in honor of its first recipient, Derek Murdoch. Past winners include Marianne Ministers, the co-owner of Sleuth Baker Street, and also Vicky Delaney. And here's a fun fact for you, Jack. You're the first man to have been given this award since your friend and recently departed giant in Canadian fiction, Peter Robinson, received it in 2010. So congratulations, Jack.
Thank you.
A little bit about you. Normally I write a nice bio, but I think you beat me to it. So on your last article, Toronto Star, December 16th, 2020, I think they did a great job summing up your career with Jack Batten's final Whodunnit column and his last crime fiction review. Jack's first Whodunnit column in the Toronto Star ran on March 7th, 1999. It wasn't the first time he'd written reviews for the paper. A quick search of their archive showed his byline dating back to 1985. And his own crime fiction books were reviewed plenty of times too. He's written 7 in all, as well as dozens of non-fiction books. All those mysteries are still in print and made it to the short list of Crime Writers of Canada Author Ellis Award for Best Crime Novel in 1990 for his crime mystery, Straight No Chaser. Since then, he has written hundreds of columns, keeping readers up to date with the latest in one of the most popular book genres going today. So after 24 years, he said goodbye to reading and reviewing whodunits. Out of curiosity, now that you're retired, Jack, do you still read them?
I do, but one of the reasons that I stopped reviewing them is that I had to read so many, and I wanted to read other kinds of books. So, like books, biographies of jazz musicians, for example. So I quit on purpose. I wasn't fired or anything.
Well, you did it for 24 years, and you mentioned in the first, or in that article, that the first author you reviewed also happened to be the last author you reviewed. Obviously, one of your favorites, I'm assuming. Would you still pick up Michael Connelly if it came by?
Yeah. I mean, I'll pay money to read his. I think he's terrific. In fact, I'm rereading his last one. And it's just as exciting and involving and all that as when I read it the first time, which is only about 4 months ago. So I think it shows I'm hooked on Michael Connelly.
Fair enough. You said you'd pay money for it. I'm assuming for the last 24 years, you got a lot of free books.
Boy, did I ever. Some of them still come in. I'm beginning to feel like a thief, but I'm writing back and telling them, no, I don't review them anymore. So just stop sending them.
You have a few books behind you, but I'm sure you have a really big connection or collection.
I do.
You started, when you and I were talking in that review I was reading, that you said that you reviewed many doubtful candidates for review. They simply didn't measure up in plotting, characterization, and scene setting. Did you ever feel that maybe you were a little too hard on maybe an up-and-coming author or book, or you think you shot straight?
No, I wasn't, but I do feel embarrassed and ashamed and everything about one review that I wrote. This was a book some years ago. I'm so grateful I haven't run into this guy. He'd kill me. But I was ordered to review it by the editor of the Star, and so being pissed off, I was unfair to this book, and it was talk about a hatchet job. It really was. And in the subsequent years, I felt terrifically embarrassed about it. So if that person who wrote that book is watching this, I'm really sorry.
I think my own personal opinion of a lot of crime authors is a lot of times we sort of put our heart and soul into the first book, maybe rush the second and third book. And some authors don't really hit their prime till 10 books in. And then they're just geniuses. Did you ever come across like authors that you're like, oh, these people don't have potential, and then surprised yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I've encountered that quite often where subsequent books don't measure up to what been done the first time. But it usually takes me about 3 or 4 books till I realize that that's what's going on. And so after that, I either don't review them or I review them kindly or something like to get around it. But fortunately, there are enough writers who hit a high level and stay there, or gradually climb up in talent. There are more of those than blow it all on the first one.
Fair enough. You also said that you encountered such an extraordinary number of first-class crime novels that was like working through an extended golden age in the genre. For many people outside of Canada, especially, the golden age of mystery is often considered the 1920s and 30s. So do you think you sort of experienced a resurgence or a second golden age?
I think the golden ages have been more recent, and they're more widespread. I mean, way back then, we didn't get crime novels from the Scandinavian countries, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in say the last 12, 15 years, there have been so many great. I mean, Henning Mankell. I mean, he's up in Michael Connelly territory. Those books of his are so good, and Iceland, for Pete's sake. You don't think Iceland is going to turn out great crime novels, but they have. So that opens up, the description of golden age when you go to a whole bunch of other countries that we never heard of in the crime field before. And in the meantime, in countries where you expect them to come from, like the US and England, there's still very consistently a very high level.
I'm referring to this article a lot, but you mentioned sort of the big 4 Canadian authors. Unfortunately, we just lost Peter Robinson, who was on your list, Eric Wright, L.R. Wright, and Eric Wright. I'm missing one. Howard Engel, sorry. So unfortunately, we just lost the last of those 4. Do you think they sort of ushered in a new golden era of Canadian crime fiction?
Yeah, I do. And Eric and Howard, when they were still with us, they lived not far from where I'm sitting right now. So I knew them, and they were certainly an influence on me in sort of the narrow-minded sense. That is, I thought, if those guys, and I know them, if they can publish books, maybe I can. So, I mean, crime novels, I've been writing nonfiction forever and ever. So I wrote the first one, Crime Plays the Ace, and showed it to Eric. And he was a bit hesitant, but then he read it and he said, "Thank God I liked it." It's great. I don't have to tell you that it stinks. So that's what got me going, and I was able to sell it. to a publisher, and subsequently did those four, then a long pause, and then it did three others. But so in that personal way, for me, that was the golden age. And I think Eric's will stand up for a long time, and so will L.R. Wright's. She was really good. One of the best from the West Coast. So in a narrow kind of way, I think that really was the golden age, and I didn't think Peter Robinson would ever end, and health only is what ended that golden age.
Yeah, depending on when you're watching this video, his last book is scheduled to come out in April or May, very soon, I believe. So I guess this is the last of his works.
I'll pay money for that.
Agreed, me too. Well, again, let's speak of your work a little bit. You once told me that you were encouraged by your friends, Eric Wright and Howard Engel, to write these stories. I also read that at one point you started your career as an unhappy lawyer, and your protagonist so happens to be a lawyer. So did your early work sort of make it, or was influenced by being a lawyer, even though you weren't a happy one?
What being a lawyer supplied was a lot of atmosphere and stuff. I knew what lawyers were like, and handling cases in court and all that stuff. But I was really interested in court cases and the law and everything. I just didn't want to do it myself. And when the 4 years when I was practicing law, I'd already met a guy named Robert Fulford, one of the great journalists in Canada. And I asked him if I could review a book for the Star. He was then the Star's book editor. And he gave me one to review. This is just before I was called to the bar. And I wrote a review, and it took me forever, but I handed it in, and I didn't hear from him. Then it appeared in the Star just the way I'd written it. And he called me in and said, "You know how to do this." And I said, "Wow, you know how to write." I thought, oh, it's the greatest encouragement, a writer can possibly get. So during the next 4 years, while I was still a lawyer, I actually spent a lot of time skipping off work and working on stuff. Bob moved to Maclean's magazine, and he signed me pieces at Maclean's. So I was writing and selling journalism while I was still a lawyer. And then I knew then I could do it. So I quit law. My parents freaked, and never did adjust to their son, the lawyer. I mean, their son, the writer. So I wasn't unhappy. I was just at that period, because I knew I was going to write. I was impatient. and then it really paid off, because I wrote quite a few books about lawyers, proving to myself again that I find it interesting, but I don't want to do it myself. And with a lot of people, they were far more impressed that I was a lawyer than that I was a writer. I was sent to write about rock musicians, and Ronnie Hawkins, rock and roller. Mm-hmm. They were far more impressed that I was a lawyer. So it actually made it easier to get interviews and stuff like that if I let it float out there well, I'm a lawyer too, you know. And they said, oh, wow, no kidding. Come on in.
Well, I
And
guess everybody wants a friend as a lawyer.
yeah, well, it helped me get an interview with Jim Morrison, you know, the Doors guy.
Mhm.
It's really weird. You know, I'm there to write was there to write a story about Jim Morrison and let it drop that I was a lawyer. And I got a long interview with the guy. It's sort of weird.
Yeah, you don't usually think of Jim Morrison giving long interviews. I think he's given some of the shortest.
Yeah, he was a very nice person. It was, you know, I was shocked when he died at such a young age.
Yeah.
And indeed, my wife and I have gone to Paris quite a lot. Went and visited his grave.
I've been too.
Ah,
Well, you mentioned a little bit of authors, or sorry, no, lawyers that you've written about. And when I was asking you, I had to sort of put my head down a bit and say, I'm sorry, I've never read any of your books, Jack. Where should I start? And you sort of gently nudged me to Ross McKay. And I thank you for it. Very nicely, it's an audiobook. So if anybody's watching that enjoys audiobooks, you can find that on Amazon, but you can find all your books on print. I think all your books, many of your books on print on Amazon. But Ross was such a unique individual, a unique lawyer, that I'm sort of shocked that I've never even heard of the man before. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book? Because I find it fascinating, even to this day. It's a fantastic book.
oh, thank you very much. I spent a long time on that book, and I was sort of proud of when it came out. Unfortunately, it came out just as the pandemic hit. Anyway, I knew Ross from the time we were kids because we were in the same year in high school. School it's right near where I'm sitting now on Bloor Street, and Ross lived on Bloor, and he was a very cool guy, except he was also very troubled. Even as a kid, he had, you know, as a teenager, he had a drinking problem. But he was a heck of a criminal lawyer, just an amazing criminal lawyer. But he made wrong moves and he had bad luck in tons of ways. And he ended up defending unsuccessfully the last two people to have been hanged in Canada. This was in 1962. Two different crimes, two different accused, two different everything. And it happened that he got through a series of flukes to defend both. And those two trials, murder trials, were fast and snappy in those days. They each lasted 2 weeks, and they're separated by only 3 weeks. So he lost 2 men to the gallows when he was only 30. So that talk about getting off to a rough start. But that's a large part of his story. But he kept on going, and he had a series of quite amazing cases. And he also had difficulty with booze and then with drugs. And he was sick, and he died at only 52. But it was easy to get the research. I mean, I did a ton of it. Easy in the sense that everybody in the profession wanted to talk about Ross. People who knew him told me stories, you know, Eddie Greenspan, people like that. The great criminal lawyers, everybody had views about Ross. And I got to quite a few of the rounders whom he acted for too. So I in the room where I am now, surrounded by that research from that book, which I haven't put away yet, and research from the book I'm working on now. That's all jazz books. Ross, by the way, was a jazz person too. I know one time I wanted to get Ross to act for a relative of mine, and I phoned him up on a Saturday night to tell him about this thing. And in the background, I could hear Stan Getz playing. So I thought, I got the right guy. Anyway, yeah, Ross was just an astounding story. More unhappy than happy, but a great story.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, you describe it. You or just somebody described it really, very well. The Saga of a Brilliant Criminal Lawyer is a great fit for those who love Perry Mason's courtroom drama and Better Call Saul's criminal subculture. And that's living up to it so far from what I've listened to. Is just like, what a complicated character, let's say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those where if it was somebody telling me the story and it was fiction, I'd be like, no, you're making that up.
Yeah, there's so many things that he got himself into that you think he's making this up. No, I didn't. Nothing. It all happened.
One name that comes up in that book, and it's only one line, but it threw me on like a wild goose chase because I had to learn more, is you mentioned that author Ellis, Canada's hangman, was actually just a pseudonym, that he wasn't a real person. And I had to go look this up because I didn't realize it. I'd heard that he'd killed over 600 people, but I always assumed it was one man, but it wasn't, was it?
No. No, there were a variety of people who took that role, but became the tradition, maybe the law, I'm not sure, that it would be done under the same name. And the last two, the guys that Ross, in the cases that Ross lost to the hangman, they were hanged back to back. Mm-hmm. So there was one man under the name Arthur Ellis who hung them together. There was a subsequent story that one of them wasn't weighed correctly and his head was torn off, but I don't think that's true, because it would be something that everybody knew. You can hardly cover that up. But the man who was the minister, the church man at it, years later, he floated this story that one of them, Lucas, the big man, his head had been torn off. Don't think so.
Well, I did, because of that one line, I did look it up, Arthur Ellis, and yeah, I did find that originally in 1913, it was Arthur B. English, an Englishman, and they don't even think English was his real name. Sort of took the name of Arthur Ellis, Ellis being borrowed from John Ellis, the hangman in the UK. So he became the first Arthur Ellis. I always assumed it was the same Arthur Ellis, but then I read, see, this was my research, 1935, at the age of 31, Ellis was called upon to conduct the execution of Thomasina Sarro of Bordeaux prison in Montreal. And just like your story, so maybe that's, facts and myth being mixed into one. He underweighed her. He took the weight that she was when she first came to prison, but she gained weight while there. So when he executed her, it did decapitate her. And I found a newspaper article on it. So I'm assuming it was true. And he lost his job over that and soon drank himself to death, I think. But then I guess it was replaced by another individual who took up the name Arthur Ellis.
Wow. I hadn't heard that story before. That's astounding and terrible story. Woo.
I found that one was an interesting website, The Haunted Walk, Canada's Hangman. And I guess there's a picture of the first author, Ellis, there. I know he's been written about a few times recently by Canadian authors, but until you said pseudonym, it never clicked that it wasn't the same man.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Derek Murdoch. I often, when I'm in a meeting and I tell people like, oh, we're giving the award out, the Derek Murdoch Award out, most people don't know who Derek Murdoch was. You're in the unique position of actually have known him. So what could you tell us about Derek Murdoch?
Yeah, but Derek was a terrific guy. He was born in London, in England, and his mother was a big reader of crime fiction. And Derek, wanted to be a writer, but he wasn't getting that way, and into that couldn't. And he became a businessman, an unhappy businessman, the way I was an unhappy lawyer. He came to Canada, I guess when he was in his 30s, to sell a new way of polishing floors, something like that. And he didn't, and he had, I mean, he'd picked up the affection for crime fiction from his mother. And he came here, and none of the business things panned out. But somewhere along the line, he began to bug the Globe and Mail. A guy named William French was the book editor then, and was for quite a long time, and wrote a book column. And there was no such thing as a reviewer of crime fiction, not in North America, because Derek became the first, because Bill French eventually signed him up and made Derek the crime fiction reviewer for the Globe. The first, as I say, in North America. I mean, that doesn't keep a guy in groceries, really, just doing that. But Derek hung in there. He lived about 3 blocks from where I'm sitting right now. So we became friends, my wife and I, with Derek, and we're friends now with and have been for many, many years, Derek's daughter, Sarah Murdoch, who worked at the Globe and the Star. And Derek, I'd say he's the best book reviewer of crime fiction ever in Canada. He was really good. He just seemed to soak up the books and theories and all of that about it. So he deserves to be remembered because he was so good at it and had such a wide knowledge. And he was also quite funny. He had an amazing vocabulary. He's the only person I know from whom the word farouche. He's talking about, he rented a room in his apartment to a woman, and I said, well, what sort of person is she? And he said, she's very farouche. Oh, really? So a great guy, and I hope somehow this helps more people to have an image of Derek.
Yeah, and you were nice enough to send me a picture of you and your wife and him at somebody's wedding. I forget who. Sorry.
Let's see. Oh, well, Derek's in the picture.
Yes. Yeah.
And everybody's journalist. It was at Sarah Murdoch's wedding.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Everybody there seems to be a journalist, a writer of some sort. Sarah and the groom didn't remain that way, but Sarah is still around. In fact, I talked to her before I talked to you, and she said if Derek was listing his top 5 friends in Canada, you and Marjorie, that's my wife, would be on it. So I was delighted to hear that and flattered, and because he is a great guy, and I'm glad his name is remembered in the award, and he would have got a big kick out of me getting it, you know, a friend. So great guy.
Fantastic. Thank you. You mentioned your past book, but you're currently retired, but not retired. You're still writing. So you're researching jazz now?
Yeah. Well, I was the jazz reviewer for the Globe at one point. So I've got tons of material, and I've listened to jazz since I was 12, say, and I got tons of records and books and discs and everything, and for the last 10 or 12 years, I've invested so much time in listening to Bill Evans, just Bill Evans, and so jazz, I think, is the one thing I've been most interested in consistently all my life. So all this material that I've got from interviewing people like Duke Ellington and Dizzy Gillespie and people like that. The Dizzy interview was actually not too long. I was asking him about the great concert of May 15th, 1953 at Massey Hall, which is, you know, greatly revered these days. I said, what was the concert like? And Dizzy said, that concert was shit. What? It wasn't. He couldn't get him to get off that that tack. Anyway, yes. So I've got it worked out to 11 chapters, some of which are now written, and a different musician is what the chapter is all about, but then it branches off and brings in different things. So it's kind of complex, and I'm hoping it works. Or more to the point, I'm hoping a publisher agrees that it works. But it is such a pleasure to work on something that you really love.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to the music that goes with it all the time. That it, man, is a treat, and I think I might finish it in 6 months or more, say. But
I don't know. We've been talking for almost an hour now, Jack. That was not intended. Sorry. Perfect. All right. Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
See you.
Bye-bye.